Welcome to the Vitamin Professor podcast, brought to you by VRM Media, publisher of Vitamin Retailer and Nutrition Industry Executive magazines, in partnership with Nutraland USA. I'm your host, Dr. Gene Bruno, Professor Emeritus of Nutraceutical Science and Chief Scientific Officer of Nutraland USA. The purpose of this podcast is to help educate the dietary supplement industry about the science of nutraceuticals and other relevant topics. If you like what you hear and see, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let me tell you a little bit about our guest today. Dr. Gad Gilad received his PhD in neurobiology and behavior from Cornell University. His research focused in the response of the nervous system to stress, neurotrauma, and neurodegenerative disease, the molecular mechanisms of nerve cell survival and death and neuroplasticity, and the development of new therapeutics. His collaboration with Gad Gilad, while working at several academic centers, including the National Institutes of Health, Weizmann Institute of Science at Harvard University, resulted in over 100 peer-reviewed scientific papers and several patents. That's a lot. One of their main achievements is the discovery of the neuroprotective and neurorescue properties of Agmatine and its development as a treatment for neuropathologies and other diseases. He is the co-founder and CEO of Gilad&Gilad LLC, a health science company that develops and markets Agmatine-containing therapeutics. Today, Dr. Gilad is going to talk to us about Agmatine. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you, Gene.
Well, so listen, we got a few different questions I want to go over with you, but let's just start with the basics. Can you provide a little background? Why have you initiated your research studies on Agmatine? Let's start there.
All right. So the opening will be kind of related to your work with Nutraland,
Yeah.
if you remember. And I was aware that you were adopting a formula or formulation of spermidine, which is a polyamine.
Yeah.
So our research on the reaction of the nervous system to injury, in fact, started with studies on the polyamine stress response, which we have really discovered to be crucial and vital for the nerve cell, the neuron, reaction to injury. And when you inhibit this response, these nerve cells just die.
Yeah.
And in the initial studies, eventually we found out that you really can treat, these are studies in the laboratories with animal models of injury, you can in fact treat them with the polyamines themselves, putrescine, spermidine, and spermine, and show that they are neuroprotective. However, very importantly, their therapeutic window, this is the range of the concentration that you treat for these diseases or the reaction to injury in this case, is narrow. So if you just go over this concentration of the therapeutic window, it becomes toxic. And so it was bugging us, and then I came with the idea that a molecule called Agmatine, which is a product of, it's a metabolite of the amino acid arginine, might be a non-toxic molecule, which is related to the polyamine because it was known that Agmatine is a precursor, that is, you can generate polyamines from Agmatine. And as history goes, we were at the time after sabbatical in the United States, we were returning to Israel, and it delayed our research a bit. And by the end of 93, we ran the experiment, which is for what we call in vitro, on
Right.
tissue cultures of nerve cells. And we found an amazing, robust effect of Agmatine on the neurons when they grow in the dish, and a model of toxicity or nerve injury, if you would like. Agmatine really protected the neuron, the nerve cells, against the toxic effect of this, what we call neurotoxin. Now, you could give Agmatine before you apply the toxin, so we would call it neuroprotective. But what amazingly, we found out also that when you give Agmatine after the application of the neurotoxin within a window of time, you can rescue these nerve cells from death. So it's both neuroprotective, you can take it before, as
And after.
protections, and like neurorescue, like a treatment
Yes.
to protect or to rescue neurons from death. So this was really exciting to look at the microscope, which we call an inverted microscope, and to look at those neurons, how they survive beautifully as compared to the tissue culture of neurons without Agmatine or with other compounds which were much, much less effective. So with our experience, we realized that we are onto something really hot. And this was by the end of 93. Imagine, and I'm not going to reveal, and I'm not going to tell you how advanced in age am I. So we were very keen and immediately applied for a patent. At the same time, we were so excited, we wrote immediately an abstract on the work and submitted it in 94, that is the meeting of the Society for Neuroscience. Now, our lawyer, the patent lawyer, heard of it. They told us, Professor Gilad, immediately retract the abstract. Because if you do that, if you really publish the abstract, you're going to ruin your application for the patent.
Uh-oh.
This is how the regulation go. So we
Sure.
retracted the abstract, and we did not report our finding only until 95.
Well, that makes sense. So let me ask you. So I want to get a point of clarification, and then ask you a follow-up question to that. So as I understand it from what you're talking about, in your laboratory research, you're looking at damage to these cells, and you were seeing that some of the other polyamines had a very narrow window of efficacy, and if and of course, whenever you're doing in vitro studies or oftentimes animal studies, fairly high doses are using compared to what you might use in a human, and so at these higher doses, you could have some toxicity with some of the polyamines, which led you to say, wait a minute, what about Agmatine as an alternative? And so then you started finding both neuroprotective and then sort of a let's say a neurorescue remedy at the same time. Now, given these much higher doses you would use in laboratory research and in vitro research, what was your next step to say, okay, I'm going to translate that dose to something that could be used in animals or humans at a safe and efficacious level? What was your next step there? Curious about that.
Of course, and I understand, and this is a terrific question, and this is a question in all drug industry. It's more art than science, but there are
Yes,
rules.
indeed.
There are rules to the game, and you can imagine our enthusiastic. Let me just regress just for a second. Throughout the years after the discovery, etc., we concentrated on the molecular mechanism of action of agmatine within the cells. How does agmatine exert its action? But back to your question. So by the beginning, let's say almost 8 years later, we were about to embark on the clinical studies. And this came after we tried to convince the drug industry, the pharmaceutical, this is where we are coming from, to take on the development of agmatine as a treatment for nerve injury, so neurodegenerative diseases. And it was, we were just met with a blank wall. There is a complete refusal from all the company we approached. And it turns out that the drug industry is entrenched in their drug development in dogma. And it's not really dogma, it's a business thing. They would not touch natural compounds because you cannot protect the synthesis of the molecule.
Exactly. I'm not surprised to hear that. I'm not surprised to hear that at all. I've come across that many, many times over my 4+ decades in the industry, that the pharmaceutical industry isn't interested in a natural compound that they can't have a really strong level of patent protection vis-a-vis the synthesis of that, which is available exclusively to them. So that makes a great deal of sense. So, I have some thoughts along the lines. Some years ago, I wrote a book on integrative treatments, complementary treatments for diabetes. And having had family members, uncles and a cousin, who died from complications type 2 diabetes, I've seen a lot of neuropathy and other kinds of nerve damage that has occurred out there. And I start to think about something like, and there are some nutraceuticals that have some application, but it's somewhat limited. I wonder about your thoughts on agmatine for something of that nature.
Right. And again, thank you for your question, because you're kind of bursting into an open door. So once we encounter this attitude from the pharmaceutical industry, what in patent language we call new chemical synthesis or new chemical property, as opposed to usage patent.
Yes, exactly.
But I decided not to give up, because we were very excited about that, with all our knowledge about the list from here to whatever, with potential treatment that didn't make it. We call it the valley of death. Like you mentioned, between animal studies and laboratory studies, and translating it to the human treatment.
Yeah.
And because we knew the properties of agmatine being non-toxic, etc., and we weren't going to give up, and I decided to go into what we call the dietary supplement jungle. Would I have known this business at the time? I am not sure we were jumped in.
Yeah, it's a challenging industry.
It's a challenging industry. However, so we did it. We decided to do it on our own, And we designed the first clinical trials really ever done. So those who are familiar, there is what is called phase 1 clinical trials, where you really check the safety, or what other people would call toxicity,
Right.
of your molecule. And what you do in phase 1 is you check different concentration of the molecule you want to treat with on a small group of patients, and for a defined time interval. So that's how you run phase 1. And so we ran phase 1, and we were excited to see the effectiveness, because some people had, to your question, had neuropathy due to sciatic nerve injury, what is called sciatica. And it was very exciting, so we immediately applied and filed for the next phase, which is called phase 2. The classic phase 2 clinical trials is you run 2 different groups of patients, one with non-effective, so this neutral compound, which is delivered to the patient unknowingly, it's called placebo, and the other arm of the clinical trial is called the experimental group, right? So one was given the dose and for the time interval we chose of Agmatine based on the phase 1 clinical trial, and the other was the placebo group.
Yeah.
And those who know the perception of pain by people, because in neuropathy, the most disturbing symptom of neuropathy is pain. It's called neuropathic pain. And so we found out that those who received Agmatine were relieved from the pain for the period that we gave Agmatine, as compared to the placebo. Once we stopped, and this was based on the clinical on the experimental knowledge that we had, and this was only 2 weeks. When we stopped, the 2 groups, because there is perception of pain, right?
Sure.
Those people who got placebo also improved, but then the 2 groups were no different anymore. So that suggested to us that we have to give Agmatine throughout the period unless the cause of the neuropathy is treated somehow. So, for example, in sciatica, is I guess about 2% of the population is affected. You know that when they cannot resist the symptoms. The symptoms are, as we discussed, neuropathic pain, numbness, shooting pain, very hot and cold, etc. And these patients are really suffering. They are deprived of sleep, etc. And so this was, back to what I said, the reason that we decided when we eventually brought the Agmatine to market to give it for a long time. You can ask a question where we were at that time, but I can tell you historically that this was the time, both our results from the experiments and at the same time confronting the authorities, we were in Israel at the time, to get the permission to import Agmatine in order to make now commercial quantities of the treatment, we encounter again huge difficulties. And you have to know, and we can return to that, that in the United States, the regulation of dietary ingredients and dietary supplements, which are the products which contain the dietary ingredients, is regulated much differently from the rest of the world, or most of the world. Meaning, you can start to market your new dietary supplement, or dietary ingredient in this case, without getting pre-approval from the FDA. You have to notify the FDA, but you don't need the pre-approval. Throughout the world, it's the other way around. You have to get pre-approval. And then, only then, you are allowed to start marketing your product.
Yeah, that's one of the
I
issues.
I won't go into it, what happened in Israel, etc. at the time, which is the same thing as in Europe, for example. We decided to come back to the US for the third time lucky, we said. And that's when we came, and this was in, let's call it 2009, 2010, when we came and developed the product, set up the company, etc. Again, we jump back and forth in terms of how events happen, but I think the audience would be appreciative in learning how things are done and how they come from the bench, in the laboratory bench, through translation research, clinical research, and into finally get a product in the hand of the consumer, customer, or patient.
So let me ask you this. I hear about the journey that you've taken. I imagine that over time, when you've had feedback from people who have used Agmatine and had some types of nerve-related issues, can you share like some of the types of feedback you've got, some of the different types of nerve conditions that people have shared with you that they've had some benefit from when using Agmatine?
Of course. So we are very careful and we are very conservative. So based on the clinical trials, as we mentioned, this was for sciatica. And in the business, as you well know, you cannot say or tell or mention in any way the name of the disease that you're selling.
Of course. In this context, however, we're in a situation where we're on a podcast, and you are not, it's not an extension of labeling. It is not that. It is, I'm asking you about, people's experience, which of course we can give the disclaimer that you would not, that we're not saying that this is going to be everybody else's experience and everybody should rely on the clinical research. That being said, I'm still curious and want to know what people have said about it.
All right. So back to how I began. So we really marketed it for people with sciatica.
Yes.
And people are smart, and they say, well, if it's good for that, it's good for that. But I want to inject a little story here, which it's so important for scientists who go into developing the treatment into commercial and into business. And to hear the first telephone that we get from a customer.
Yeah.
A lady saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. God bless. And then she goes and describes what she went through before starting our Agmatine product. And what we described before, the neuropathic related symptoms, the pain, the numbness and everything. And she was almost crying. And it was a moment. It was a moment. Now, more to your question, you can understand that people, being what they are, hearing about a new product, they would like to say, oh, I have this, I have that, related, I want to try it. So we got telephone with people with various type of neuropathies. And the list of neuropathies and the cause of neuropathies is long. It's about 20.
Yes, it is. Mm-hmm.
It's about 20. You mentioned diabetes, so there is what is called diabetic neuropathy.
Yep.
And I think diabetic neuropathy is the largest group of people who suffer from neuropathy. There are other neuropathies like chemotherapy-induced neuropathy, which is a limiting factors in treating people with anti-cancer, let's call it, drugs, which are potent, they are toxic, etc. And they cause terrific neuropathy, and it's limiting because these people need their treatment, but they cannot take it anymore because the neuropathy which these drugs cause is just unbearable. So imagine these people who are between a rock and a hard place. They want to be controlling the tumor, but they can't because they cannot tolerate the effect of this treatment.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is just some. At the same time, we started another clinical trial in New Jersey with Dr. Rosenberg there. And we were studying, it was an open label cohort. That is, you recruit people knowing what they suffer from, knowing that you're giving them Agmatine, product, and the groups were diabetic neuropathies, because it was easy. They were what we call idiopathic neuropathy. Idiopathic neuropathies is the other largest group, and this is what we call for idiots, because we don't know what the cause for.
Right. That's the fancy term, idiopathic, so that the layperson can say, "Oh, it's idiopathic," which means like we don't know.
Exactly. It's so funny, how the clinical, I would call it industry, is treating and giving names. But idiopathic, and there are many idiopathic diseases, meaning we don't know what the
of
cause.
course. Yes.
So anyway, this clinical trial went on and on for a long time, recruiting patients, and there are some other patients with other types of neuropathy, but these were the major groups. It got published eventually. So to your question, people with various types of neuropathies been using it over the years, thousands. And we mentioned, on top of sciatica, we mentioned diabetic neuropathy, idiopathic neuropathy, chemotherapy-induced neuropathy. And the study in New Jersey with Professor Rosenberg was done on what we call small fiber neuropathy. Why? These are nerves which are very thin, and they are those which are affected mostly in painful condition, which is, neuropathic pain.
Yeah.
And small fiber neuropathy is the underlying cause in many neuropathies, like diabetic neuropathy. So people today are very smart. They go on the internet and they, click on their keyboard, and they would find small fiber neuropathy, and they find that, for example, fibromyalgia, a terrific disease, mostly affected women.
Yes.
The underlying cause mostly is SFN, small fiber neuropathy. So they also started with that. And so we have people who are taking them, they're taking the product, they're taking Agmatine-based product by their own decision.
And what are the doses that people are using? What are the doses that, well, more importantly, what are the doses that you say that you're recommending for people to take for ongoing use?
Right. So we are back to your initial questions. How did we come up with a dosage to treat people?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it was, as I said, this was a translation based on what is known in the industry, how you're going to calculate dosages from animal studies.
Right. There's methods for doing that. I'm aware of.
Yes,
of
there
those.
are.
So you just used one of those.
Decide, this was the art of the profession on my gut feeling and on the phase 1 clinical trial, which we described.
Which is important, yes.
Right. So we ended up with a recommended dosage for a normal human being.
Yes.
Called, which, say 160 pounds, like about 70 kilogram.
Right.
And we are giving them about 2.7 gram per day per person. Now, how do you take 2.7 gram? That's a lot.
It's
for
a fair
this
amount.
powder. So you have to come with a production way. How do you do it? How do you give it? And so Agmatine is given as the salt of Agmatine, Agmatine sulfate. And as the song goes, and so many people know that the sulfate salts of so many drugs is very bitter.
Yeah.
So if it's very bitter, it's hard to take. So what you do in our industry, you encapsulate it. You
Sure.
put it in capsules, which are made of gelatin, or these days also from
Vegan sources. There's a few.
vegetarian, capsules, and you devise with your colleagues in the production facility how you're going to put the powder into the capsules. This is a very fluffy powder. So
It is I was about to ask, is it dense or is it fluffy? So I'm guessing if it's fluffy, you probably need about 500 capsules to accommodate that. Is that about right, or is that
6?
6? Okay.
Right. And then you have to press the button, activate the machine, but you have to be very knowledgeable. And we are working since the beginning with one small company about that. The person there is amazing. He's coming from the drug industry. He's an amazing person. So he knows how fast the machine would go in order to produce, to end up with a capsule and efficiently making the capsules, let's call it this way. And to your question, you can put only this much in a capsule, which will be easily swallowed by people, because some people have. And I can tell you a story about that. So we put it in what is called size 0 capsule.
You're putting it in a size 0, okay.
Size 0, that's why it's a capsules that usually hold, depending on the powder, it's about 500 milligram, which is a
Yeah.
0.5 gram. And what do you do with 6 capsules? How do you take them?
Take two, three
It's
times a
amazing.
day.
Right. So we ended up recommending taking it twice a day, and we recommend take 3 and 3 in the morning, 3 in the evening, with or after meals, after dinner or after breakfast. You can take it on, but on empty stomach, it's not recommended. So, but you can, and then you start taking this recommended dose, and it's very interesting when you have an acute condition like in sciatica. Sometimes the effect of the treatment is initiated within days.
That's
Within
interesting.
days.
That quickly, huh?
That quickly, but that's, to our experience and the physicians who are using it routinely, it's unique to acute. That is, that you
I see. So
you-
more of an acute stage as opposed to a chronic situation.
acute,
It's probably
right?
longer.
That the disease started only recently.
Okay.
Most of those who start taking it have their neuropathy for years, like diabetic neuropathy, etc. And we learn eventually, as I said, from the clinical trials, we know you'd have to take it constantly throughout, because the cause of the disease is not removed. And so with chronic conditions, we know that you can start seeing the effect within 4 weeks, sometimes 6 weeks.
That's still pretty good. That's still pretty
Yeah,
darn
that's
good to see
coming
it
from,
that quick.
That's
I'm
coming
wondering.
from,
Yeah, I was just wondering when you're doing it in capsules, that certainly is a preferred dosage form amongst consumers. But I was wondering what made you not consider to use tablets, because typically, you could use tablets and maybe get it down to something like 4 tablets instead of 6 capsules.
this is always on the agenda. It's much easier to create the capsules and to move forward fast.
That's true. The capsules are very quick to do. You got a little bit more bench work, a little more R&D involved if you're going to try to make it into a
And
tablet.
this is and to yours. I mean, you are so knowledgeable in the dietary supplement industry, so you immediately ask the second question. And so of course, but very importantly, once you start as a patient, as a consumer, to feel the effect, you can lower the dose to what we call in the
A
jargon,
maintenance
to a
dose?
maintenance dose.
Yeah.
And we have people who have, instead of 6 capsules a day, which is 2.7 gram per day, they were able to lower it, but very gradually, to 3 and some to 2
Wow.
capsule a
That's
day,
impressive. Yeah.
and to maintain their level of satisfaction, to control the neuropathic symptoms. Okay, but
That's
if
fascinating.
they gave it all together, symptoms returns within days, a week.
Yeah.
And so, people want it. It costs money. Of course, we have to, take this into account.
So I'm going to go backwards for a minute and just ask you a question. I'm not sure if you addressed this or not. If you did and I forgot, I apologize. But did you mention a specific mechanism of action for this? Because I don't recall if you did.
We rushed forward so fast. These are like 7 years of our own laboratory working. And I should mention, once we discover the neuroprotective effect, and finally after the patent was registered and we got the publication only at the end of, well, January, I remember that, right? January 96.
Mm-hmm.
But we still were first. But once it was out, numerous labs all over the world confirmed our finding. And this is for a scientist, this is your,
That's the best.
that's the best. That's the best. And this is what also gave us the confidence to go on, as I said, with the clinical trial. What's amazing about Agmatine, as I started to describe, it is produced from the amino acid arginine.
Arginine.
Those who are a little bit into chemistry, I would say you would take an acid, which is amino acid, and you remove the acidic group, which is called carboxyl group, and you end up with a molecule, which is called agmatine, of course, and it's now basic. It's not acid, it's a base.
Yeah.
The unique property of agmatine, it's a strong, let's call it a strong base. On one side, it has the amino acid. It's like arginine, which is an amino acid. So it has the amino group from the remaining from the acid. But on the other side, it has a guanidine group, like in arginine.
Yeah.
A guanidine group probably is this specific structure is what is so important for its non-toxic effects. It's a safe, we call it a safe treatment. You don't get any serious side effects. And I should mention, when we just started, and we were the first to use commercial amounts of agmatine, it was made by a chemical synthesis, and the producers of the ingredient, the raw materials, were not very careful. It wasn't washed enough. We know it today. And some people develop gas and mild diarrhea.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a story of a bus driver who was in our initial phase 2 study who took agmatine, and he was suffering. And on his bus round, he got diarrhea. He called us and told us about the story. He had to stop the bus without the passenger. He said, "Excuse me." So he knows his route. He stopped at the very closest station, ran to the bathroom, and returned and told his passenger what happened, and they clapped for him. You know, so many stories when you are directly involved in these things. Now, I should mention that this diarrhea was also, self-correcting. Eventually, it passed away. And of course, today, and I should mention that also, since 2014, 2015, the production of agmatine is what we call a fermentation process. A fermentation, it's not made by a chemical synthesis, but by specific strains of bacteria which have the right metabolic machinery and the enzyme to produce agmatine if you let them grow under the optimal conditions. And now we get a beautiful, pure, so to speak, product, the raw material now. So the last time we heard about this was, 9 years back. And so it's an amazing, amazing molecule, safe molecule. The base, to your question now, you can imagine being charged with 3 pluses, what we call positive charges. It is interacting with various molecules in the cell. And so the list is long, and we call it the ultimate modulator molecule, because it can modulate action of certain neurotransmitters, and you can ask me later. It can modulate certain ion channels in the cell membrane, which are very important for controlling nerve cell activity and other cells. It controls nitric oxide production, but it modulates it. Most of the action is by inhibiting the enzyme which produce nitric oxide, or many people know nitric oxide as NO.
Yeah, nitric oxide synthase. Yeah, you're saying.
And the list is on, and as I mentioned, it is a precursor or a molecule from which you can generate polyamines. See, so for us, this is where we are coming. So it's very important for the reaction of cells to trauma. Very important.
So so basically the answer is that it has multiple mechanisms of action.
Exactly.
A single one.
To your question, if I can stop, because we are very proud of this, we call it, the metaphor we use, the molecular shotgun, as opposed to magic bullet.
Got it.
The magic bullet is what the drug industry mostly, even today, works. Like one drug, like the lock and key. You know, you have one molecule which acts on one target, and this is what it's done, and this is how it cures the disease. But we know that most of nervous system diseases and other diseases are multifactorial.
Yeah, most things are. It's seldom that it's ever just one thing. But now I'm wondering if, you introduced this product to market. Did you first introduce it as a raw material sold to supplement companies, or did you introduce it as a finished good? And that's the same question now. Is it available as a finished good or as a raw material, or both?
Right. And now we have to go back to history. Agmatine was discovered by a person, scientist, exceptional scientist called Kossel, Albrecht Kossel. In 1910, he published a paper, and in 1910 he got the Nobel Prize for his discoveries and work on nucleic acid, the building blocks of RNA and DNA. So the next stage after his discovery, or this was about the same thing, he had a large group, he published the chemical synthesis, which he invented and discovered, really. So what I mean is it's known for 100 years. And this is why we encounter the problems with the drug industry, right? It's not a new chemical entity for them.
No.
Forget it. We're not going to create a drug. Humanity is going to suffer because we cannot make a buck. Okay. So this is the history. Now we are coming into the business, right? And we buy our analytical chemicals from the best known company in the world, which is called Sigma, and then Aldrich Sigma, etc., etc. Sure. And we come into the business and we tell them, we want to really start a clinical trial. How much it was cost for you? The price for 1 kilo was 7,000, worth its price in gold.
Yeah. You needed another option.
We need another option. I won't bother the listener and you, the listeners and you, with the history of how it was developed, but we can touch on it because I know you'll ask some questions. And so we ended up really generating a business for the companies who are producing, were producing, and now by fermentation, not by, as I said, chemical synthesis. And I didn't find any excitement in start being a seller or a second seller of the raw material, the Agmatine itself.
Right.
Especially after we came up with really the product. How much you need, how to use it, when to use it, for what to use it, and we can touch on we are basically an R&D company. So neuropathy is just one, and it was the only one to date which is proved by clinical trials. But you can imagine, now that we discussed Agmatine, its mechanism of actions, and what is known from animal models in the laboratory, that there are other conditions that we know it will be effective for.
So if somebody wants to get this today, how do they get it? Do they just search it on the web, or is there a website they go to?
Another question. You can buy it from us. You can buy the product from us.
And what is your website?
The website is called For Nerve Health. What else?
Oh, well, that should be easy to remember. For Nerve Health. That's
What
a
else,
good
right?
one. Now, is it strictly available as a human supplement, or do you have supplements for pets? I ask because our company recently joined the National Animal Supplement Council, so I've been learning a little bit more about the use of supplements in animals. And I know that there's nerve problems that companion animals have. So I was curious if you offer something like that for pets.
Of course.
Okay, of course. How not?
Of course. And not only, of course. You can imagine, the animal studies, that were done in the lab, but we ran clinical trials on animals. Excuse me a second. Okay. I must mention, I'm not just talking to the wall. My wife is here. She's always correcting me. We are a wife and husband team. We are working together in the lab since '79.
Very nice. Very nice. Very
And
nice.
this is unique. Some people call it crazy, but this is the fact. So
That's
she's
okay.
here.
I've been with my wife for 47 years, so not a problem.
So you still have to go. Anyway, she's giving me notes. And so it's fine. So yeah, back to that. We ran clinical trials in collaboration with Louisiana State University Veterinary School on dogs with osteoarthritis, and I'll mention why, and on horses as well. Thoroughbred horses, and it was very effective with dogs with osteoarthritis, those dogs, large.
Like the
breeds.
experiencing like the hip dysplasia, that kind of thing.
Exactly, and horses, it's called lameness in horses.
Yes. So that's fascinating. So you had good results with that.
And I want to mention one thing.
Yeah.
The amazing thing with horses is that they are big.
Yeah.
It's very easy to study the other, so to speak, organs. And so they were able to look at their stomach with endoscopy. And they found, which we knew already from, not from my lab, but from other laboratories in the world, that it is preventing stomach ulcers from developing. And the horses, which is very like humans,
That's awesome.
They develop ulcers when they are on anti-inflammatory, what we call NSAID, non-steroid anti-inflammatory drugs.
Excellent.
And they develop ulcers which is a limiting factor for
So,
the treatment.
yes.
And it's
Okay.
prevented. It's
That's
really exciting.
that's pretty awesome. Well, we are just about out of time now, but I just wanted to let everybody know that fornervehealth.com, I guess it is. You can go to and you can find not only the product, but I imagine you can read up and have a little bit more information there. I want to thank you, Dr. Gilad. This has been absolutely fascinating. I have some additional questions that I'm going to follow up with because I've got all kinds of ideas now. So again, thank you so much for being a guest on the Vitamin Professor. This is unique. I haven't ever really had a guest really specifically addressing this area. So this is very, very unique. Again, thank you.
Can I interject? I would like to add something about the company because you asked
Sure.
about the company and the product. As I said, we are an R&D company. We are scientists. We are neuroscientists. And we learn the business as we go along, right? Because you have to survive, so to speak. Anyway, I want to say that the company now is on the verge of two things. One is scaling up marketing and sales, which is very important for us.
Sure.
Which we kind of forgot along the way and were immersed in our research and development. And on the other hand, since I disclosed, so to speak, my years on this planet, we are looking to sell the company really to a large company who would be able to see eye to eye with us the excitement and the good that Agmatine can create in the world, and we have everything planned how it should be done, and we are scratching our hand to do it. But
perhaps with the maybe you're having been on the Vitamin Professor, and as people watch this, perhaps you'll get some people contacting you to ask about that.
Exactly. That's why I mentioned it. Thank you, Gene. Thank you, Gene, so much.
Very good. Well, again, thank you for being on the Vitamin Professor, and to all of our listeners, if you like what you heard, please like and subscribe, and we will see you next time on the Vitamin Professor. Thank you.
Thank you so much.